was called away for a couple of days. He texted me and asked if I would sort of jump in and give the talk tonight. I'm, of course, glad to do this, glad to be with you. First of all, I want to say Henry is fine. We offer intentions for his travels. Secondly, this change of plans makes it all the more clear that a Teisho or a Dharma talk is an offering we create all together. Whether you're listening now or tuning in later. This generativity reminds me of a poem by Emily Dickinson, one I've held close for a long time. A word is dead when it is said, some say. But I say, it just begins to live that day. So keep in mind that Teisho is not a lecture, but an invitation to look directly into the heart of the matter, the reality of who you truly are. No need to remember or follow along discursively. If something strikes you, let that resound. Let that be a living word, the one word. Dogen put this another way. He wrote, let go, and the Dharma fills your hands. It is not within the boundary of one or many. What boundaries, divisions we conjure. Dogen goes on. When you try to speak, it fills your mouth. Impossible to speak. At the same time, everything is preaching at the top of its lungs. The Dharma freely functioning, all pervading, each expression occupying everything. Calling us home to that most intimate reality. What Yamada Koan Roshi in one comment calls our true home, the old nest, our homeland. For us today, homeland does not only point to the empty, infinite freedom and boundless compassion of the awakened world, of this world. It also conjures a scene of this reality conveying itself in the confluence of COVID-19, still on the rise in so many places, and mass protests around the country, around the world, unleashed in response to the murder of George Floyd. Homeland conjures a scene of police brutality, systemic racism, calculated inequality, targeted violence. For some, homeland also cracks open the possibility of social change, a reckoning, a movement for remaking the world that will not cease and desist. This past weekend, Ruben Habito Roshi led a 2-day online session organized by the Maria Canaan Zen Center. He opened by offering us each a koan, a living word, a presentation of the fact. Please, I can't breathe. Sit with these dying words of George Floyd while sitting there, breathing. Please, I can't breathe. Come home to your homeland, your native ground, that which is more intimate to you than you are to your own self. Come home to now. The only time there is a matter of life and death. This very moment, this breath. So tonight, as a way of exploring what Zen calls the great matter, what Dogen writes as one word, life, death. I'd like to turn to a case from the Denkoroku, or transmission of light. This is case 31, depending on the numbering. It's Doshin, or Master Doshin. The case came to mind in part because the last time I spoke at Mountain Cloud, we looked at Sozan, the 30th ancestor, who transmitted the light, or Dharma, to his disciple, Doshin. As a reminder, transmission is only now. And it's you, your bright light. So intimately shining. So here's the case. One note, Kanchi Daishi is Master Sozan, the master who begged Eka, Bodhidharma's disciple, to free him from his sins. So, the case. The 31st ancestor, Master Doshin, bowed deeply to Kanchi Daishi and said, I beg you, Master, have mercy on me. Please grant me the Dharma gate of liberation. The ancestor replied, who is binding you? Doshin said, no one is binding me. The ancestor answered, then why are you seeking liberation? With these words, Master Doshin was greatly awakened. That's the case. Doshin's awakening is like a wave on the shore of his master's own experience. He lived from about 580 to 651, the fourth Chinese ancestor after Bodhidharma, Eka, and Sozan. Doshin began practicing and studying Zen as a child at age 7. When he was 14, he met Sozan, and in their first exchange, recorded in this case, experienced a deep awakening. He served as Sozan's attendant for 9 years. Doshin became an important figure in the development of monastic Zen practice. Long story. Here, he is the 14-year-old novice with hair on fire, life depending on it, earnestly begging for liberation. So, a couple of stories, they're short. As a young boy in the monastery, Doshin was responsible for ringing the bell for the morning service. As the story goes, one morning he overslept. He was so mortified by this that from then on, for 60 years, Doshin did not lie down to sleep. That's recorded in Ferguson, a wonderful book, and also by Dogen in the Shobogenzo. Doshin, for 60 years, it said, did not lie down to sleep. He sat in zazen with a resting post, ever mindful of his practice. Apparently, you can rest, even sleep, sitting up. Doshin was summoned by the emperor 3 times to serve as national teacher. This legacy, went out. This very deep and earnest master. Each time Doshin was summoned, he refused. The emperor finally told his emissary, this time if he doesn't come back, bring his head. When the messenger arrived with his sword, it is written, Doshin quietly stood up and exposed his neck. The messenger was so impressed, he put his sword back and returned to the palace. The emperor changed his mind, honored Doshin, and left him in peace. Doshin died at 72, sitting in zazen. His final words to his disciples were, all of the myriad dharmas of this world are to be dropped away. Each of you protect this understanding and carry it into the future. Some 600 years later, Dogen, Eihei Dogen, had his experience of dropping away body and mind. Body and mind falling away. Dogen included Doshin in the litany of ancestral masters whose names he regularly chanted. Who is binding you? Master Sozan asked the earnestly seeking Doshin. What is it that binds us, that brings us here, seeking peace, insight, seeking wholeness for ourselves, for the world, seeking liberation, offering ourselves in silence, no matter the amount of noise we entertain? What holds us back from letting go and realizing the peace, humility, and compassion, the boundless freedom of who we truly are? The bindings. We have ready answers. Anxiety, loss, fear, our delusive need to control, as if that were possible, our nagging, sometimes desperate sense of inadequacy, and then the overwhelming injustices of this world, the poverty and violence, the dying planet, the debilitating distortions of human life. What one tradition calls the curvature of the self in upon itself. That distortion. These maladies are so human, so universal. Zen distills them into 3 poisons, and we know them. We know them well. Greed, lack, I want, I need, not enough, never enough to fill the gap. Anger, aversion, I don't want, don't like, protect, defend, shore up the gap. And ignorance or ill will, the delusion of separation. We don't see who we truly are. This one seamless existence. We don't realize the freedom and abundance. I need mine. We are intimately familiar with what binds us. But that's not the question. Doshin begs his master for liberation. And Sozan asks, who is binding you? Such a turning question. It must have raised doubt for Doshin. One can imagine him going and sitting and looking into it, taking what Dogen calls the backward step and shining the light of his practice on that question. One can imagine him seeing through the bindings, circumstances, assumptions, the niggling sense of self, the ache of constraint. Seeing through it all to what? Nothing there. Can't find anything. No one there. No one is binding me. No one to be bound. If Doshin saw all the way through to that mysterious no one at all, maybe he also saw the question itself, simply, intimately, clearly conveying the empty, unbounded world. Who is binding you? Who is binding you? How will you ask the question? How will you hear it? Please, I can't breathe. George Floyd was bound, held down, knee crushing his windpipe for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Sitting with this, I can only say, in a very real sense, he died for us. We owe our lives to him. Not only because he lives on in a powerful movement for transformation, now a global movement, but because we are breathing. Kanzeon breathes. Hear of the cries of the world. Hear and heard one intimacy. Your most intimate cry. Laid bare. Absorbed. Heard. Who is binding you? Master Sosan invites Doshin to realize a world so vast and boundless, so thoroughgoing in its uncompromising oneness. Even the bindings are absorbed. One empty, infinite embrace, one outpouring, including our failings, including our sense of separation. There is nothing outside this one body. No border, no edge. And there's nothing inside either. To really see through the bindings, to discover right here in this fraught and bound up world, no one is binding me. We need to catch a glimpse, sometimes just a glimpse of our true self. No one there to be bound. No one at all. Then why are you seeking liberation? Sosan asks. This is the turning word, returning for the first time, coming home. Why are you seeking? The case says, with these words, Doshin was greatly awakened. He awakens to the boundless liberation that has been there all along. His whole body freely functioning exactly as it is. Why seek for something that is already fully realized right there in your seeking? Such a beautiful question. And not only in seeking, of course, standing up, sitting down, laughing, crying, finding what is yours to do. There is no other emptiness than this. Dogen writes at length about Doshin in a chapter called Continuous Practice. It's actually Continuous Practice Part 2 in the Shobo Genzo. Here's just an excerpt. from Dogen. In the year 651, just before he died, Doshin gave instruction to his students, saying, "All things are liberated. You should guard your mind and teach future generations." After saying this, he sat at ease and passed away. He was 72 years old. A stupa was built for him on the mountain. This is Dogen. On the 8th day of the 4th month of the following year, the door to the stupa opened of itself. I suddenly thought of the wonderful last line of Dogen's Fukanza Zenji. The treasure chest opens of itself, and one uses the treasure freely. The door to the stupa, the tomb, opened of itself, and inside it, Doshin's body looked as if he were alive. After that, his students kept the door open. Life, death, suffering, compassion, giving, receiving. There are many ways to keep the door open. In fact, what door? Dogen goes on. Know Doshin's words. Know them. Hold them close. All things are liberated. Then Dogen adds, it is not merely that all things are empty, or all things are all things. Not merely, but that all things are liberated. Doshin had continuous practice before and after entering the stupa. That's Dogen. Before and after is nothing but right now. Continuous practice right now. Life, death, now. Searching is now. Liberation, now. Zen sometimes speaks about being unshaken in the face of whatever may come, including violence on Black and brown bodies, violence against gender, violence against the earth. This unshaken has nothing to do with being above things, as if removed, nothing to do with dismissing suffering. It's about being so thoroughly plunged into this world, all of it, that when anything shakes, the whole moves. Just one moving, even one earthquake, in total stillness. Dogen calls our sitting the still, still state. A few days ago, a student relayed an experience that left her shaken. In the best sense of the word, she said. One piece of the experience was that she saw simultaneously and full on essential reality and the phenomenal world. One reality, even simultaneously can't adequately convey this one fact. It is not merely that all things are empty or all things are all things, but that all things are liberated. As Henry has put it, we awaken to an awake world. How can we see it? This innate liberation, our birthright beyond time, before knowing. Maybe trust the seeking. Empty your hands. They're empty. Come home to the breath. Just now. One breathing. So instead of turning to Kazan's verse, I'd like to close by reading a poem that was sent to me today, actually this afternoon. It's by the American poet Brad Modlin. Some of you may know his work. I didn't. So glad. The poem is called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from 4th Grade. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important. And how to believe the house you wake in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear. Also, that you have enough. The English lesson was, I am, is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy. The one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it was you lost, and one person add up to something. For Doshin, that something is vast, beyond any equation. One dynamic, infinitely capacious, nothing at all. right where you sit, unique, unrepeatable. Such treasure. Thank you.
Valerie, thank you so much for that extraordinary expression of life. I think what we'll do now, I'll put the poster back up. It'll have some information about giving Dana, and then we'll close out in a couple of minutes. Good night, everyone. I've set it so you can unmute yourselves if you want to say hi to each other.
Hi, everyone.